While a highly respected JRPG giant now, during the PS2 era, Atlus was still trying to make a name for itself outside of Japan. In order to get to where they are today, they needed to make their games stand out. And it was in the mid-2000s they finally did so with the release of Persona 3. All these years later, we're finally getting an HD remaster of the PSP port, simply known as Persona 3 Portable, for the PlayStation 4, Nintendo Switch, Xbox One, Series X, Series S, and PC. This 2010 version differed from the prior two releases of the game on PS2, with various changes made to the presentation, gameplay, and the inclusion of a playable female protagonist. But the question remains, does Persona 3 Portable hold up over 13 years later? And does this HD remaster do right by one of the most important games in Atlus history? I'm just going to rip the band-aid off and answer that second question. As an HD remaster, this new release is acceptable at its best and ugly at its worst. In terms of performance, the game runs perfectly on Switch. The problems have more to do with the decision to remaster Portable specifically and the way they went about doing so. Seeing as they were trying to make a PS2 game work on a handheld, the original Portable had to make a number of concessions. While dungeon crawling was done in 3D, everything outside of it was presented in 2D, with you selecting icons using a cursor as opposed to physically moving your character around. Rather than cutscenes playing out in 3D, they were instead presented like a visual novel, with actions being described to you. Instead of depicting key story moments with anime cutscenes, you instead got screenshots. This HD remaster takes all of that and uses AI upscaling to make it HD. While character portraits look good, things like backgrounds, those screenshots, and even the opening movies end up looking smeared, blurry, and pixelated, especially around text. Before you're even able to name your character, you're presented with a long, very noticeable line of artifacting that I'm shocked was left in the game. It feels like they stuck the PSP assets into an upscaler and didn't care to touch up anything that came out. Playing in handheld mode, I was able to better ignore a lot of the, at times, ugly presentation, but it doesn't excuse the fact that it feels like minimal effort was put into the actual remastering of this game. But this is just Persona 3 Portable as a remaster. What about Persona 3 Portable as a game? Persona 3 follows the story of Seas, a group of students investigating a mysterious phenomenon known as the Dark Hour, a hidden time period between each day. During this time, people turn into coffins and the local high school becomes a giant tower known as Tartarus. Those who don't transform into coffins, however, become the targets of monsters known as shadows. Using the manifestation of their psyches, known as personas, you and your fellow students live through a full year of your lives, managing your school and social lives during the day, and fighting your way through Tartarus at night. In terms of story, Persona 3 Portable tells the same plot as the original release of Persona 3, as well as the enhanced re-release known as Persona 3 FES. However, one piece of story content Portable lacks is the FES exclusive campaign, The Answer. In its place, we get a playable female protagonist. Lovingly dubbed Femc by the fandom, her campaign acts as a sort of remix on the game's themes. While the overall narrative is ultimately the same, how certain plot beats are approached change from the original protagonist. There's always been a level of disappointment surrounding the absence of the answer, especially because it's canon, but Femc's campaign is just better. Its story feels like a nice, more uplifting take on a game known for its heavy subject matter, while its gameplay is just as good as its male counterpart. Overall, the story of P3 stands as a sort of middle ground between the tone of the original Persona trilogy and the tone of the modern Persona 4 and 5. It's able to bounce back and forth between dour and upbeat pretty regularly. The main theme of Memento Mori can be found all over in various forms, and while there are plenty of cases where it can be fun and goofy, it can also get depressingly real, tackling subjects like the loss of loved ones, divorce, and unfulfilled dreams. However, the writing can at times show its age. Sometimes it can be a character talking in a cringe-inducing yet charmingly antiquated way. Other times it can be boring and unengaging. There are even some moments that are so dated and offensive by today's standards that it has and will continue to start more than a handful of Twitter arguments. In terms of gameplay, P3 is split between a calendar-based social sim and a turn-based dungeon crawler. In between Tartarus outings, you'll be spending your time going to school, shopping, and doing various activities. These activities, in turn, will slowly improve your social stats. By leveling those up, you are then able to hang out with your friends, seeing their personal stories play out, and ranking up your social link with them. Sadly, not every social link is created equal. While some characters have unique and memorable storylines, others I found to be just boring. Thankfully, unlike later entries in the series, all S-Links give you is bonus experience for whatever personas you fuse, meaning I didn't feel like I was missing out on something super important by not interacting with characters I just didn't care for. In the evenings, you're given the option of heading into Tartarus. Here, you'll be exploring every floor of the tower, fighting your way through shadows in randomly generated levels. In battle, the main combat mechanic is the one more system. By attacking a shadow's weakness or landing a critical hit, your target will be knocked down and your character will be able to attack again. Once all enemies have been downed, you can then perform an all-out attack, dealing massive damage to every target. To do all of this, you'll need to make use of your personas, which you get by picking the right card during shuffle time after battle. You can then, in turn, take those personas and fuse them together, creating brand new, more powerful ones. One of the best things Portable did back in the day was the addition of various quality of life features and gameplay tweaks. Faster load times, a useful, if limited, fast travel, the streamlining of various systems, and overall smoothing out the rough edges. The new HD remaster too goes a few steps further by making gameplay feel smoother, adding the ability to change the difficulty at any time, and a new quick save feature. While it might sound crazy that this was something that needed to be added, the original Portable added the ability to directly control the other members of your party. In the PS2 versions, all you could do is change their AI via the tactics menu, altering their in-battle behavior towards certain ways of fighting. While you can still play the game in that way, it's nice that you're given the option to play in a more traditional fashion, especially considering tactics has always been a contentious feature. What stands out to me about Persona 3's gameplay is how experimental it can be when compared to later entries. Not everything works, but I always respected the game for trying out these frankly strange ideas. For instance, both you and your party members can become fatigued and get sick while fighting, with the only way to get better being to leave the dungeon and spend a few days resting. Sometimes party members will be busy and just won't come to Tartarus, forcing you to change your party composition if you decide to go. While I'm sure there are people who will hate them, scenarios like these are a nice twist to gameplay that helps keep things fresh, which is sadly something P3 struggles with. As I spent more and more time in Tartarus trying to reach certain floors before the next deadline, everything just started to blur together and the game got mind-numbingly tedious. While there are different level aesthetics, barely any of them stand out in a way that actually feels new. Randomly generated level design results in you seeing the same basic geometry practically hundreds of times by the time you finish a block. Enemy variety isn't huge, leading to you fighting the same shadows over and over and over. I certainly found enjoyment in it, but I also found myself unable to play the game for long periods at a time. Even during the day, things can get repetitive. There are only so many activities you can do, and there are only so many songs to set it all against. While the soundtrack is comprised of a number of earworms, some tracks are played so many times I grew tired of them not even 4 months into the game. None of this is helped by the slow pacing of the story in the beginning. Sure, I enjoyed not being consistently forced to watch an hour of cutscenes before being allowed to play the game again. However, it feels like it takes 3 to 4 in-game months before the story starts to truly go places, with most story developments in that time being done in short bursts and being multiple days apart. And to top it all off, part of me is still bothered they decided to port Portable over FES. There are plenty of compelling arguments that support the decision, but I can't escape the fact that there's a version of this game with better models, 3D environments, and anime cutscenes. The ability to play this game with its original intended presentation, as opposed to a stripped down version of it. These aren't concessions that need to be made anymore, so I'd be lying if I said I wasn't bummed out by the visual novel styled presentation here. I like Persona 3 Portable. Does the game show its age? Definitely. Would I have preferred the presentation of FES? Absolutely. As an HD remaster of a PSP game, it leaves a lot to be desired due to its poor AI upscaled graphics. However, from a gameplay perspective, this remains the best way to play one of the most important games in Atlus history. And with that, we've reached the end of the review. Are you picking up Persona 3 Portable? Do you think they should have remastered FES instead? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're here, check out GameXplain's review of the Switch port of Persona 4 Golden.